Hey everyone, and welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Now, you're probably here because of all the talk about Honeywell, ticker symbol HON, and for good reason. They're doing some really interesting things in automation, aviation, and the energy transition. All pretty important stuff in the world of investing, especially with their fourth quarter earnings report and the 2025 outlook coming out February 6th. It's going to be a big moment for them, no doubt. So today, let's take a look at what's been going on with Honeywell stock, see what the analysts are saying, and even think about some investment strategies based on all of this.
Yeah, you're right on the money. Honeywell is at a turning point. The next few weeks are going to be really telling. As of today, January 27th, 2025, the stock closed at $225.71. It swung between $220.10 and $225.87 just today. That's a pretty decent amount of volatility, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And it's down from a high of $231 just earlier this month. You'd think a company with a market cap of almost $146.77 billion would be a little more stable. So what's causing all this movement?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And the technical indicators are giving us some mixed signals. Some point to a possible upswing, while others suggest a downturn. It's kind of a puzzle, but let's try to break it down.
Okay, let's start with the good stuff. What's making the bulls optimistic?
Well, for one, Honeywell is currently trading above its 50-day simple moving average, which is at $225.43. This could mean that the stock might trend upwards in the short term. Plus, two other indicators, the Williams per SAR and the Commodity Channel Index, are both flashing oversold. It's like a rubber band that's stretched too far. It's bound to snap back eventually, right? The Williams per SAR is at negative 71.63, and the CCI is way down at negative 119.53. These kind of dips often come before a rebound.
Makes sense. So this recent dip could be a chance to buy low. But what about those bearish signals? What are the bears worried about?
Well, on the other side, we have the moving average convergence, divergence, or MCD. It's negative right now at negative 2.03. And then there's the relative strength index, the RSI, which is at 40.26. These indicators paint a different picture. They're suggesting a possible downward trend for Honeywell.
So we have some conflicting signals from the technical indicators. And just to make things even more uncertain, some analysts are even predicting that the price could drop to around $190.19 by the end of 2025. That's a possible decline of 14%, which would be pretty big. It sounds like investors need to be really careful with Honeywell. So what would you say is the main takeaway from all of this?
The main thing is that the market sentiment around Honeywell is mixed, to say the least. That earnings report on February 6th is going to be a big deal. It could either back up the positive signals or confirm the bearish concerns. Until then, the best thing to do is keep a close eye on how things develop.
All right, so proceed with caution for now. Speaking of that earnings report, there's a lot of anticipation building around it. Analysts are projecting earnings per share, or EPS, of $2.31 for the fourth quarter of 2024. However, that would actually be an 11.15% decline year over year. On a more positive note, revenue is expected to grow by 5.19% to $9.93 billion. The question is, can Honeywell exceed those expectations?
Yeah, that's the big question. I think it's important to point out that even the analysts are divided on this. Barclays just raised their price target to $260, and they gave Honeywell an overweight rating, suggesting that they believe the stock is undervalued. But then you have Robert W. Baird. They actually downgraded their rating to neutral and lowered their price target to $217. So clearly there's no real consensus on how Honeywell will perform in the future.
Honeywell is a very interesting case study right now. You have these short-term market fluctuations happening, all while these massive long-term trends are playing out in the background. So let's switch gears for a minute and talk about Honeywell's long-term strategy. It seems like they're making some big bets on some major global shifts.
You're absolutely right. Honeywell has been very open about their focus on what they call mega trends, specifically automation, future aviation, and the energy transition. These are areas where they're putting a lot of resources into developing new technologies.
And those trends are only going to become more important in the coming years. For example, the aerospace industry is making a strong comeback, and Honeywell is in a great position to take advantage of that with their advanced systems.
Exactly. And then you have the fast-growing adoption of automation in all sorts of industries, which plays right into Honeywell's strengths, not to mention their efforts to become a major player in sustainable technologies for the energy transition. They're playing a long game, but it looks like they have a solid plan.
And they have the numbers to back it up. Honeywell just announced a record backlog of $31.8 billion, which is an 8% increase. That's a pretty good sign of their future revenue potential.
It is, however, even with a strong strategic vision and healthy backlog, Market sentiment can be unpredictable. Investors are looking for tangible results, and they're going to be scrutinizing that February 6th earnings report very closely.
So given everything we've talked about, let's discuss what this means for someone who's thinking about investing in Honeywell. What are some possible strategies investors might consider?
Well, for those who are comfortable with a little more risk, there's the potential for short-term gains by taking advantage of those price swings we mentioned earlier, especially as we get closer to that earnings announcement. It's sometimes called playing the earnings.
High risk, high reward. But for investors who are looking more long-term, Honeywell's focus on these high-growth sectors like automation and sustainability might make it a good option for long-term investment.
Precisely. But regardless of your investment style, it's so important to stay informed, keep an eye on the market sentiment, keep up with industry trends, and track Honeywell's performance compared to its competitors.
That's good advice. It's easy to get swept up in the excitement or the fear, but doing your own research is crucial. Now, before we move on, I'm curious to hear your take on something.
Yeah, I'm listening.
So we've talked about the technical indicators, the analyst predictions, and Honeywell's strategic moves. With all of that in mind, what would you say is like the most important thing to think about when you're deciding whether to invest in Honeywell or not?
That's a really good question. And honestly, there's no single answer that fits everyone. It all comes down to what your investment goals are and how much risk you're comfortable with. But if I had to pick one key takeaway, it would be this. Don't get lost in the short-term ups and downs. Focus on the fundamentals.
Okay, I like that. Focus on the fundamentals. Could you maybe explain a bit more about what you mean by that, specifically when it comes to Honeywell?
Sure. In Honeywell's case, those fundamentals include their strong position in those megatrends we talked about, automation, aviation, and the energy transition. Those are areas that are going to grow over the long term, and Honeywell is in a good spot to benefit from that. They have a history of innovation, a global reach, and a solid financial foundation.
So even though the market might be a little uncertain right now, those underlying strengths should give investors some confidence in Honeywell's long-term potential.
Exactly. Of course, there's always some risk. It's important to keep an eye on Honeywell's progress and be ready to adjust your strategy if you need to. But for investors who believe in the power of those megatrends, Honeywell offers a pretty compelling opportunity.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in those daily ups and downs in the stock market. But we have to remember that investing is a long game.
Absolutely. And that's where Honeywell's long-term focus becomes even more important. They're not just going for those quick profits. They're making investments that are meant to create value over the long haul.
That's definitely reassuring for those long-term investors. But let's be real for a second. What are some of the potential risks or challenges that Honeywell might face down the road?
Well, one obvious risk is that their bet on these megatrends doesn't pay off the way they're expecting. Maybe those sectors don't grow as fast as they thought they would, or maybe competition gets fiercer, and that hurts their profits.
Yeah, those are always possibilities. Markets are constantly changing.
Right. And there are other things to think about, too, like geopolitical instability, a global economic downturn, even unexpected technological disruptions. All of those things could have an impact on Honeywell's business.
It seems like there's a lot to keep track of.
There is, but that's part of what makes investing so challenging and rewarding. It's not just about picking the right stock. It's about understanding the bigger picture and being ready to adapt as things change.
So knowing all of this, would you say that investing in Honeywell right now is a good idea?
Well, at the end of the day, that's a decision that only you, the individual investor, can make. What I can tell you is that Honeywell is a well-established company with a solid track record and a clear vision for the future. They're going after those high-growth markets, and they have the resources and the experience to carry out their plans. But just like with any investment, there are risks to consider.
So it comes down to carefully weighing those risks and rewards against your own personal investment goals.
Exactly. It's about doing your research, understanding the company, and making a smart decision that fits with your overall investment strategy.
That's great advice. I think this is a good point to wrap up our discussion on Honeywell. But before we go, we'd love to hear what our listeners think.
We would.
What do you think Honeywell's upcoming earnings report will look like? Are you bullish or bearish on the stock in the long run? Let us know in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast for more insights and discussions on the stock market.
And be sure to share this episode with anyone who might be interested in Honeywell, or even just in investing in general. We appreciate your support.
You know, as we were going through all this information, one thing that really struck me was how much the market seems to be reacting to every little bit of news and every event that happens.
Yeah, I noticed that too. There's so much focus on things like daily price changes and that upcoming earnings report. But it's important to remember that those are just small glimpses. They don't necessarily tell the whole story.
Right. It's like trying to understand a movie by just watching a few random scenes here and there. You miss the overall plot.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to look at a company's long-term strategy and where they stand within those bigger market trends. In Honeywell's case, their focus on automation, aviation, and the energy transition gives us a much wider lens to look through.
And those trends aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Actually, they're only going to become more important in the years to come. So even if Honeywell runs into some bumps in the road, their long-term prospects look pretty good.
I agree, and that's something for investors to keep in mind. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day chaos of the market. But if you believe in a company's core strengths and their long-term vision, you're more likely to ride out the tough times and come out on top in the end.
That's a really important point. Investing is a marathon, not a sprint. And just like in a marathon, you need to pace yourself, stay focused, and keep your eyes on that finish line.
Well said. And speaking of the finish line, it looks like we've come to the end of our conversation about Honeywell. We've covered a lot today. Hopefully you've gotten some valuable insights to help you think about your own investment strategy.
Absolutely. We've talked about Honeywell's recent stock performance, the upcoming earnings report, what the analysts are saying, and of course their strategic focus on those exciting megatrends. But in the end, the decision of whether or not to invest in Honeywell is up to you.
That's right. Do your own research. Think about your investment goals and how much risk you're okay with, and make an educated decision that you feel good about.
And before we sign off, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Honeywell? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the stock? What questions do you have for us?
Leave a comment below. Let's keep talking.
And don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast for more in-depth analysis and investment discussions like this one.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, family, anyone who might be interested in Honeywell or the stock market. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for listening.
You know, as we've been talking about Honeywell, one thing that's really stood out to me is their commitment to research and development.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're not just sitting back and relying on what they already have.
Right, exactly. They're really putting a lot into innovation, especially in those megatrends we discussed. Automation, future aviation, the energy transition. They don't just want to ride the wave. They want to be the ones shaping the future.
I like that. And that forward-thinking approach, it shows on their financials too.
Absolutely. That record backlog of $31.8 billion, up significantly from last year, I think it really says a lot about the demand for their solutions. It shows they're not just betting on the right trends, but they're executing their strategy well.
Now, thinking about potential investment strategies, we touched on this a little earlier, but knowing everything we've discussed, what advice would you give to someone thinking about adding Honeywell to their portfolio?
Well, I always say the most important thing is to make sure your investment strategy aligns with your own goals and risk tolerance. For those who are looking for long-term growth and who believe in the potential of those megatrends that Honeywell is targeting, this stock could be a really good fit in their portfolio. But it's important to remember that no investment is without risk.
Right. Honeywell operates in industries that are sensitive to things like economic ups and downs, geopolitical events, and technological changes. So investors need to carefully consider those factors before making any decision.
Exactly. And diversification is key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread your investments across different asset classes, different industries. It helps to manage the risk.
Diversification is so important. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the importance of focusing on the fundamentals. Can you remind us what those fundamentals are and why they matter?
Sure. When we talk about fundamentals, we're talking about the core things that drive a company's performance over the long term. For Honeywell, this includes their strong position in the market, their commitment to innovation, their experienced leadership, and their solid financials. Those are the things that build sustainable success.
So even though it's easy to get caught up in the daily swings of the stock market, we have to remember that those fundamentals are what really determine a company's long-term value.
Exactly. And for anyone thinking about investing in Honeywell, understanding those fundamentals is essential.
Great advice. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about Honeywell's business, looked at their financials, explored their strategic direction, and even touched on some investment strategies.
We have. It's been a really great discussion.
And now we want to hear from you, our listeners. What are your thoughts on Honeywell? Are you bullish or bearish on the stock? What questions do you have for us?
Leave us a comment below. We'd love to continue the conversation.
And don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk podcast for more discussions on all things investing. We have new episodes every week covering a wide range of companies and market trends.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, family, anyone who might be interested in learning more about Honeywell or the stock market. We appreciate your support.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time.